I'm always joking my son's not even going to need to learn how to drive because self-driving cars will just be everywhere. And I wonder what the educational equivalent of that's going to be.
Welcome back to another episode of Tank Talks. I'm your host, Matt Cohen. On this week's episode, we welcome to the tank Melissa Cash, co-founder and CEO of Pok Pok, to share her journey in building an award-winning kids app. Melissa shares the inspiration behind Pok Pok and how her time at Disney and the collaboration with Snowman influenced its development and the challenges they faced during the spin-out of the business. We get Melissa to share how Pok Pok's idea originated and the principles behind Pok Pok's design and principles as a kid app that are aligned with parents' desires to avoid screen time. We discuss the impact of winning the Apple Design Award and the App Store Award, which helped boost visibility and growth for the company and also helped the company secure amazing investor interest, but also the struggles she faced in finding more female investors to join the company. And finally, Melissa discusses the future of educational technology for young children and the key metrics they look for in measuring success at Pok Pok and her vision for the legacy she wants to leave behind on educating children. Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with Melissa Cash from Pok Pok. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Melissa.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
I appreciate you joining us today because you obviously got a really interesting background building one of the most brilliant and well-known apps on the App Store. But before we dig into that, it'd be great if you can give us a brief background on your journey into becoming an entrepreneur and where you spend most of your time as a professional.
Sure, yeah. I landed in Pok Pok very serendipitously, I will admit. If you'd asked me as a kid, what are you going to be doing? I would not have guessed this. But I started my career in marketing and PR, working at a couple of different startups, both in Europe and in Canada, which is where I'm originally from. And then I spent a good chunk of my career working for the Walt Disney Company, but in Germany, which is where I was in charge of developing and designing physical products for toddlers and babies. Everything from strollers and baby bottles to apparel and really anything that your kids use at that young age. And then I ended up meeting my co-founders, Esther and Matthias, who are husband and wife, who live actually in Belgium. This is a very international story. And we met because, frankly, I had just moved back from Germany to Canada. I was starting to look for my next thing. And I was having a chat with my older brother, who is also the founder of an app company called Snowman. And at the time, one of his employees, Matthias, had this idea with his wife to make something for their kids. And my brother was like, you know what, you should chat with Melissa. She worked at Disney for a really long time. She might be able to help you. And one thing led to another. And we ended up realizing this is too important not to do. And that sort of led my journey toward entrepreneurship.
Before we get into the story and the inspiration for Pok Pok, I want to ask you a question. As a young parent now with two young kids, a 3 and a 1-year-old, why is all the greatest products for kids built in Germany? I'm talking about physical products.
I think it's just because of the value that's put on education there, combined with the amazing manufacturing. They have such a high standard for product quality, whether that be a Porsche or wooden blocks. You know what I mean? And it's so ingrained in their culture and society. And so I think those two things together make them real global leaders for childhood development products. And yeah, my house is filled with tons of German toys, honestly.
Sure. I didn't realize that Disney had offices in Germany. So what were some of the products that we would see in the market today that you had your hands in?
Yeah, they had a huge office there because the German-speaking market is a big one for Disney. I would say the most well-known would probably be the Nook baby bottles. I don't know if your kids ever used Nook, but they're made in Germany. And we worked really closely with the team at Nook to develop and design a multitude of ranges of baby bottles for the global market, actually. But because they were in Germany, we worked really closely with them. And my son to this day still uses Nook bottles that I designed when I was working there. So yeah, that's probably the biggest one you'd have heard of.
Very cool. Let's get into the idea of Pok Pok. What was the initial inspiration behind founding Pok Pok? Tell us a little bit about it for people who may be not familiar with it, who don't have kids, because it is one of the most well-known apps out there today. But tell us about the original story.
Thank you. Yeah. So Pok Pok is essentially a collection of digital toys that spark imagination and creative thinking and all of those juicy life skills that kids need, but through play. And so we designed this sort of Montessori-inspired collection of activities that are designed to be very low stimulation, non-addictive, and just really gentle to be that first healthy introduction to screen time for kids. And the reason we started was because, like I said, my co-founders, Esther and Matthias, they had 2 kids. They had a 2-year-old and a newborn. And as someone with 2 kids yourself, I'm sure you know what that's like. And it's basically just chaos. And so they were trying to figure out, like, how do they get themselves 15 minutes a day to deal with the baby, make a meal, go to the bathroom, and have their 2-year-old be learning and playing safely? But also, how do they introduce technology to their kids, and at what age and with what content? And so they started looking around on the App Store for something to give their 2-year-old, and they couldn't find anything that they felt good about. It was a lot of very overstimulating and addictive video games that were not very appropriate for a young child, and also not very educational, or tons of these like pedagogical style apps that have children memorize and regurgitate information instead of doing like deep learning and playing. And children, especially those under the age of 5, learn the best through play and experimentation, not through the rote learning of like memorizing and trying to spit that information back out. So they were like, what about the floor of our house? Like, it's filled with toys. Why has nobody ever taken those and brought them into a digital world? And so that was really the initial idea for Pok Pok. And the first thing they wanted to make was a busy book. I'm sure you have one or 10 at home. And it's, these books with just like a million different images and no words. And you just talk through them with your kids, and you can play I Spy. You can just teach them what's what. And they're such beautiful toys. And that was their son's favorite thing to do when he was 2. So they thought, we can actually make this better in a digital world because it can interact with him. So their first concept was, this digital busy book where you just tapped an object and it would animate and make a very like quiet, gentle sound. And that's right when I met them. They started working on that as like a hobby project on the weekends. And we talked about all of those things, but we also talked a lot about how all of our kids are going to grow up to have jobs that haven't been invented yet, and we have to somehow prepare them for that world, and a world that will obviously be very dominated by technology. And as AI takes over many of the jobs that you and I have right now, we have to prepare our kids to work in a place that really looks different than it does today. And for us, one of the biggest things there was just being able to teach our kids how to think differently, how to think creatively, and how to think for themselves, frankly, because that's something that the AI definitely cannot do at this point. So we wanted to create a product that would help empower and get these kids ready for that future that none of us can really predict at this point. And all through, embracing the technology we have instead of just running away from it.
It's so impressive, like what you thought about, because these are all the things that me and my wife talk about and struggle with all the time. It's like, how do we take, some of the things in our house and turn them into a digital, transformative kind of engaging, playtime, while also not giving them too much screen time, because we know how bad that is sometimes as well. But, for my 3-year-old, we've been recently doing every night before bed, ABC and strategy and memory games on my computer, because they're just available. And she's been learning a ton about them. What's narrower, what's skinnier, what's wider, what's heavier, things like that. And it's really hard to kind of teach them that in a non-gamified experience. But there's so many ways we can take this conversation. I want to understand just part of the entrepreneurial story. You had to spin this Pok Pok development out of, I guess, a program, Snowman. Can you tell us a little bit about Snowman and, how it was taking it from inside Snowman and bringing it out to an independent company?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the intention was that Pok Pok was always going to be its own company. But when we all got together and started talking about this, so it was my brother Ryan and his co-founder at Snowman, Jordan, who I've also known since I was like 3. They're childhood best friends and now business partners. And then Esther and her husband, Matthias, and me. And we sat down and we're like, okay, we want to do this. This makes a ton of sense. Market opportunity, like everything lined up. But the big problem, I guess, was that I was the one who had never worked in the app business before. Esther and Matthias came from film and animation and were working in the video game industry at the time. Snowman is the creator of many Apple Design Award-winning games. Alto's Adventure is probably the most famous, but they have games now on Netflix and Apple Arcade and many other platforms. And so I was like the black sheep. I was like, hey guys, I have a lot of experience. I'm very smart, but I do not know this business. And we kind of all banded together and realized like, okay, but together we do. So let's figure that out. And so what we did was the first year of Pok Pok was really us kind of dividing off and working in different areas. So what I did was I became director of operations at Snowman, went through this like crazy crash course to learn the apps and video games business as quickly as I could, meet all of the relevant platform holders, stakeholders. I owe a lot to my brother and Jordan, of course, for helping facilitate all of that and kind of teaching me the industry. Meanwhile, Esther and Mateus worked on the product and started designing and iterating. And we made a first couple of hires on the product team, and they worked really hard. And then we knew the plan was always to sort of branch out, but we wanted to leverage Snowman's brand and clout, honestly, because why wouldn't we? I mean, we were all working together on this, and we felt like it would be a huge mistake to not connect the two companies because we were so intertwined just naturally. We were doing helpful things at Snowman. They were helping us with Pok Pok. And so we decided that we weren't just going to break off quietly, but we would make it like a big deal. And so when we announced the company, we shared that like Pok Pok was sort of this incubated company within Snowman. And now to this day, we actually share an office with them in downtown Toronto. And so we are two completely separate entities, separate companies, separate employees, but we share creative space. And I think that gives us a bit of a secret sauce because you get fresh eyes on things. You know, when I'm in the weeds, I'll walk in and talk to my brother from like a totally different standpoint. Or when our artists have hit a wall, they'll go talk to the Snowman artists and vice versa. So it's like a very unique situation, but it's a huge part of who we are for sure.
Yeah. So you took a crash course through obviously the relationships that your brother had to get access to the app ecosystem. What did you learn about it? What sort of hypotheses did you have about the, app marketplace, if you will, that were totally proven unfounded after you got in the weeds?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest thing was visibility. So I was never like an app person per se. Like I had a few apps on my phone that I feel like most people have. But I wasn't like an app nerd. I wasn't paying attention to like WWDC announcements. Like I didn't know what was going on in the ecosystem at all. So my point of view, which actually ended up being very valuable because most of our customers are like me or like I used to be. And I was like, how do you find these things? Who makes these apps? Why do they matter? Why should people pay for them? And that really led me to try to understand it from both sides. So like as a consumer, what do I really care about in an app? What's going to make me download one? And let alone download it, but also pay. This was back in like 2018 when we first had the idea for Pok Pok. So this was sort of just at that like tipping point where people were stopping paying for like premium mobile games and experiences, and we're either going down the subscription path or freemium. So it was just this mentality shift. And then I also was just very curious about how we're actually going to get parents to figure out that this exists, because I don't to this day still know a single parent who like wakes up in the morning and is like, let's see what's new on the App Store, or let's see what Google Play put out this morning. Like that's not what we're doing. We're like changing diapers and trying to get out the door. So I think for me, it was both like I guess my hypothesis was really centered around trying to understand that buying pattern and where we could differentiate ourselves. Because from my view, every kid's app on the App Store looked identical. It was just like as many colors and flashy things as you could pack into one visual, and just trying to slap like the ABCs, the 1, 2, 3s, shapes, counting, like all those buzzwords that you're like, oh yes, that's educational, into one place. And I was like, well, what if we did the exact opposite? What if we took most of those colors out? What if we quieted it down? What if we made it so simple that a 2-year-old could open the app for the first time on their own and just know what to do? And that came from obviously a lot of what Esther and Mateus and our design team were working on. But just from a business standpoint, I thought, yeah, this is going to be the best way to differentiate. And I think at the beginning it was, in the first year, it was really valuable for us. But then we hit a wall essentially where all those types of people had already heard about Pok Pok. And then it was time to really hit the masses. And so we needed to explain it a little bit more because it is so different than everything else out there that the uber simple approach was almost too simple. And then we found ourselves in a situation where we're like, okay, we do have to explain what this means, because some parents were like, wait, what? Like, how do you play? How do I win? What's the point? And we're like, there is no point. There is no winning. There is no losing. There are no levels. Just pretend you're 3. And like, as a parent, we forget about that.
I've often read that like, a parent obviously cannot correlate to what a child's 3-year-old brain is going through, because their brain is literally like it's on acid for like the first 6 years of their life. Just everything is so stimulating. And to be able to relate to that is really hard for a parent. So we just come at everything from a very logical approach, and whether it's right or wrong. I guess a question I'd like to double click on is, what were the core principles behind Pok Pok's design and the educational approach you were trying to take? And how did your influence or your time at Disney influence the development?
So the core principles for us were really centered around play and learning. Like, it sounds very simple, but the play piece, it had to be really fun and juicy and multidimensional. So kind of like when you give a kid Lego and they play with it when they're 2, but they'll still play with that same set when they're 6. It's just going to be very different. So instead of stacking 2 blocks and throwing them against the wall to see what happens, they're going to be building huge structures around your living room. And that is such a beautiful part of growing through play and growing in play. So we really wanted that aspect so kids wouldn't grow out of the app after 30 seconds because, as you know, as a parent, kids grow very quickly. And then we also really needed there to be a learning component. We wanted this to feel just as educational as the wooden blocks on the floor of your house or coloring does. We didn't want it to feel too academic because there was enough of that out there. And I think a lot of those products prey on parent insecurities that their kids, going to fall behind or not be ready for kindergarten, quote unquote. But I think the real beauty in learning at this young age is through experimentation and play. So we really wanted to lean into that, but still have the whole place and app feel very high quality, very educational. So those things were sort of the 2 things that grounded the entire vision. And then there were lots of other things. One was we weren't going to digitize any physical toy or real life experience that wasn't made better digitally. We tried many things and realized this is actually just better in real life. So we're not going to do it. We also wanted to make sure there was no gamification at all. So no winning or losing, no points to score, and no rules to follow as well. And there's a few reasons for that. I think the first one really is that gamification can lead to addiction. It makes people want to come back and, collect one more apple, score one more point. And I think that it's really healthy to build competition and that kind of drive in kids. But when it's paired with technology, it often creates this toxic relationship. And so that's not to say that healthy video games don't exist. It's just to say that it's much, much harder to get your kid to walk away from something where they feel like there's just one more thing to do. So we wanted Pok Pok to always be very non-addictive so that the kid could step away from the iPad without having a meltdown. And this was really for the parents, for us, because the number one reason why we felt guilty about screen time was because it made our kids go crazy. When it was time to take the device away, they would cry and scream, and it was almost not worth the 20 minutes of peace for the 15-minute meltdown after.
Exactly what I say with my wife all the time.
Yeah. So we're how do we build this for the parents just as much as for the children, right? And I think when you take away the gamification, you also take away the hit of dopamine that comes with it.
So that's how you make it non-addictive, by taking away the rewards aspect?
Exactly. So that's a huge part of it. So there's no dopamine hit when you do something in Pok Pok that, well, that's not true. There is a dopamine, but it comes from an intrinsic place. It's not an extrinsic motivator of oh my God, I just finally collected the last thing. Dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. And then you have this crash after, and then you're okay, I need another one. Yeah.
Confetti and all that stuff doesn't come out when they get it. I got it.
There's no reward system. So in Pok Pok, just as an example, we have a town. It's one of our most popular toys. It's those, rugs you grew up playing with as a kid with cars and all those things. And if you hit a traffic jam and you can't get the car through and you realize you have to move, the tractor out of the way first, and then you get it through, you're just damn, that felt good. There's no one clapping for you. There's no leprechaun that jumps out and says good job.
It's self-generated dopamine for succeeding in your own mind, not from something telling you succeeded.
Exactly. It's just intrinsic motivation. It's so simple.
I read that you also worked with pediatric therapists and experts to develop the app. Can you tell us what that process was like?
Yeah. So we decided early on we didn't want to have just one resident teacher because, the whole world is here and we want to diversify our points of view. So we work with educational advisors at many different stages in the company, one of which was a pediatric occupational therapist. And what we worked with her for was specifically the sensory piece. So her daughter actually also has sensory processing disorder, and that's something she specializes in as well. And we really wanted to make sure that we weren't sensory overloading children, and that it was a low stimulation environment, especially for children who are neurodiverse. This is a big one. And so a big part of that is like Pok Pok doesn't make noise unless the kid touches it. So it's never going to be, there's never like background noise. It's never talking at you. Nothing moves really unless you touch it. Sometimes you'll get like a little wiggle or a woggle just to sort of spark something if you're not touching the screen at all. But other than that, it's very just like quiet and still. And some of those things are what we worked on with the pediatric occupational therapist, was just to make sure that we were never overstimulating kids from like a visual or auditory point of view. We also worked with educators like kindergarten teachers and daycare professionals and owners. We worked with a neuroscientist who's also a mom of 3. We also worked with, we spoke to a professor of creativity for months who just helped us even kind of get into the mindset of like, you know, how do you build a creative space to spark creativity in others? Like, and that roster of advisors is always evolving. Like we just signed on with 2 female astronauts who are consulting on our new space toy. And like, so that one's a little bit different. Like they're not coming in to consult necessarily on like the physics or of space, but they're there to make sure that like everything they build is authentic and true to the real experience of what it's like to be in space. And we're going far beyond just like showing the planets and the stars and the moon. And so we were like, well, we've never been to space. So like, who has? So the creative process is truly always evolving because we update the app so regularly. So we're like calling these people back. They come in, we work with them sometimes for years on end. Sometimes it's for like a specific project. But yeah, it's definitely some of the most fun we get to have here.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. Obviously, all of this has culminated into a tremendous amount of success for you and the Pok Pok team. You know, how did winning the Apple Design Award impact Pok Pok's growth and visibility? And maybe tell our listeners exactly, you know, who maybe don't have kids, like how design can be won for something that kids don't really notice.
That's actually a really good point. Yeah, well, the Apple Design Award is kind of like the Oscars for the apps, for the app industry, I should say. And you can't apply to win one. You just get it or you don't. So when we won that just a couple weeks after launching in 2021, we were truly shocked. Yeah, we did not expect it. We were really in awe and so touched.
Did they just email you out of the blue, basically?
We got an email asking us to get on a call. And then we got on a call and they said like we were nominated for an Apple Design Award. But that was the very first year Apple did a nomination process. Previously, you just found out that you won. And usually this, you know, pre-COVID and post-COVID, you're invited to Cupertino, to WWDC, which is where Apple presents a lot of their products for the next year and software. And so, yeah, you're invited in person and it's a whole to-do. But we won during COVID. So it was basically like a Zoom call. And it was still insane and very exciting. And then we watched, so we knew we were nominated. And then I guess 10 days later or so, WWDC happened and it was virtual. And we just watched it live. I remember watching it. I was with my family and yeah, we won. And I was just like, what? This is crazy. We just launched like 3 weeks ago. So it really catapulted to.
You won after only launching for 3 weeks?
Yeah.
How's that possible?
That's the show.
That's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, when we built Pok Pok, like, of course, we tried to get Apple's attention and share it with them, but there's only so much that you can do, really. And I think what Apple really loved about Pok Pok was that it was so different, and it took 2 things that matter most to them and brought them to life, which is education and design. So we were really kind of pushing the boundaries there in the kids space. No one else had ever made something like this before. So I think that alone just got their attention. And yeah, we were very excited because, again, like you can't apply for these things. So we were thrilled. And like I said, it really gave us a huge boost. I mean, it put us on the map as a company. Before that,
what did it do to like quantify some of that?
Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of downloads. Like it was our biggest day ever until we won the App Store Award, which happened like years later. So it's almost impossible like to get that kind of day without winning something like that. So it was a huge moment for us. Yeah, we were very happy.
I mean, obviously that, that first app design award before you got the app store award helped you secure some funding. Can you talk about some of the, challenges you faced in securing funding early on and how you focused on female investors as well?
We've raised a couple of rounds of venture capital at Pok Pok. The first one was actually before we even launched the app. And we've had tremendous success with it, I have to say. We've been very fortunate and found some incredible investors who we really love and respect. We just recently closed our Series A this spring, and that one was tougher only in that we found it very hard to diversify our cap table. So we had an amazing lead investor in Nico Wittenborn from Adjacent, and his kids have been using Pok Pok for years already, and I've known him for a long time, and he's just amazing. And the round was filling up really quickly, which is, I'm sure people listening know, like as a founder, there's nothing better than having your round fill up quickly. But, we're a mom-founded company, a parent-founded company. We wanted to make sure that the cap table was diverse at every round. And in the Series A, we were almost oversubscribed with only men. And many of those men they're all incredible people. Many of them are dads, but we just felt uncomfortable with the fact that there were no women this time. So we decided to do a first close where we took in most of the cash, but then we sort of set a chunk of capital aside to dedicate specifically to women. And that took, I would say, like more than twice as long to fill than it did to raise the entire chunk of the Series A, which happened very quickly in a matter of weeks. So that just should tell you how difficult it is to find capital from women, especially in the growth or later stage companies. So what the challenges that I was finding were really that there are a lot of female investors in the pre-seed stage. There are tons of angel investors. They're fantastic. A lot of the funds that exist at pre-seed and seed are also run by women. So that's fantastic. But then when you hit Series A, there's this like steep drop off where most of the funds are run by men or they have women on the team, but they're not the decision maker typically. Or, the women who are angel investors don't have the check size to participate in a round as large as the Series A typically demands. So we had a lot of women offer like $10,000 checks, but when you're raising $6 million, it's not the wisest move to take checks that small. So we really struggled, honestly. Like we did the first close, which was so fast and so fantastic. And then it was like pulling teeth to find women.
I want to ask the logistics part. So did you tell like the men who were being part of the cap table, sorry, like your allocation is going to be cut down because we're saving this remaining 2 million or so for women? Like, what did you tell them?
No. So here's what we did. Like anybody who we had already said, like, you can come in, we didn't, we're never going to go back on our word. Our word is really important. So we just said, hey, certain folks were just in. They had way bigger checks. We had already decided earlier on they were like either leading the round or playing a very significant role. And then some of the smaller folks that were joining in or smaller funds, it was really just a matter of us saying, listen, we're still in with you. We love you, but we noticed we're in this place right now where we don't have any women on the cap table and we want to make sure we can make space. So before I give up a potential female investor, I need to know, like, are you 100% in? Because investors say I'm in, and then only until the money is in your bank account is that sure. So there's many moments along the way where anybody can pull out. And so even though we had commitments from many folks, that could all fall apart. So I came to everybody and said, listen, like, you have my word that you're in, but can I have your word that you're in? And some people just right then and there said, you know what? I totally get it. If you can find a woman to take my place, I will happily bow out and wish you the best of luck and support you along the way.
Did any of them offer to introduce you to women investors?
Yes. Everybody, pretty much every single person. And our lead investor, Nico, in particular, was amazing there. He brought us a few other women. Like when we told everyone, they were like, we love it. How can we help you? And we got tons of introductions.
That's great.
I think every single woman that came through, except for one, came from an existing investor in this round. So everybody mobilized their community, and that's how we ended up filling it. And it was really amazing to see that support from all these guys who it just reinforced how wonderful they are and why we're so happy to have them as investors, men, women or not. And so, it was a bit of a headache, to be honest, just because it took much longer. Like, it would have been nice to have been done and gotten back to my day job, but it was really important to do that. And if I ever have a daughter, I want to be able to tell her that we held out.
That's awesome. I love that story. Taking it back a bit, the pandemic was obviously a huge boost for a lot of digital products. What did it do for your team, and how did it affect your growth and sort of plans and launching and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we launched in the middle of the pandemic in May of 2021. So when the pandemic first hit, it crossed our minds to launch early, but we quickly realized like the product is not an 11 out of 10 yet. It's like an 8 out of 10. And we're kind of perfectionists. So I'll never know if that was the right decision, honestly, because you can't go back in time. But I'm very happy with the decision we made, because not only did it lead us to an Apple Design Award, but it led us to on the path we are now, which is very successful and very happy. So yeah, maybe had we launched sooner, we would have been way bigger. Who knows? But the product was also worse. So maybe not. Maybe we would have been out of business.
So you won the Apple Store Award in 2023. Talk to us about that process. And did you get to go to Cupertino this time?
This time we went to New York. But yeah, same thing. We got an email. Can you get on a call? I got on a call. It was me and like 20 people, which I didn't expect because the invite was just one person.
Was that intimidating?
My hair was not in the state I would have liked it to have. They were like, you're nominated for an App Store Award. I was like, what? Like, I actually thought you could only win an Apple, like one or the, I know other people had won both, but frankly, it wasn't on my radar, really.
Let me ask you, does Apple use Zoom or do they use Teams? What do they use?
They use WebEx.
WebEx? Oh my God, I wouldn't even be able to make it on the call. I can't even load WebEx. That's
if
crazy.
You work with Apple, you have WebEx installed.
That's brutal. Okay.
It was very exciting. So they told us we were nominated and to stay tuned. And then we won. We got to go to New York and hang out with the other winners, meet some press. And it was a really amazing experience. Esther and I are really like the faces of the company. So we went together, and we both have kids, and we've both been growing this business for the last few years. So it was also a really nice, almost vacation. We spent one afternoon just like enjoying New York City without our kids and partners. And it was a great moment for the team.
That's so cool.
It gave us another fantastic boost, of course, just in terms of downloads and subscribers, but it also put a lot of like wind behind our backs, and I think reinforced that even though we're now 2.5 at the time, I guess more like 2 years into the business, we are still innovating and pushing the boundaries and are still front runners in our category. So it gave our team just this amazing feeling. And when we came back with the award, I'll never forget, like we had employees like kissing it. Like it was just a big deal.
That's so cool. What was it like? What did it do for the culture of the company?
Amazing things. I mean, people are like, we spend 90% of our lives working. Like, you have to enjoy what you do, or it's such a waste of your life. And it's something we talk about a lot here with our own culture. And we really want people to love their work and their time here. And stuff like this just really makes it all that much better, because it's not only reinforcing the value that you put into your job, that people know and see the work you do and have rated that to be, top of class, let's say, but also it really brings us together to know that like we did this as a team. This is not my award or Esther's award. Like it's really everybody's. And so it just brought us closer as a team. And it also really helped with some hiring that we were doing. Because,
I'm sure it did.
Yeah, we raised some money after that, and we grew the team more. And it's a lot easier to grow the team when you have the 2 biggest awards you can get in our industry under your belt. So we're so fortunate and lucky to have that. And now, it's been great for the culture.
I'm sure, it helped a lot with the Series A fundraising, especially in these markets. But I got to ask, you have 2 full-time jobs, one at the office and one at home. How are you maintaining that work-life balance while leading such a rapidly growing company?
If I figure it out, I'll let you know.
Tell me, please.
I mean, some days it feels like I do not have it in grip, honestly. But other days it feels so easy. I don't know if you feel the same, running your thing and being you, and then also having 2 kids. But I think the biggest way I balance it is with help. Like I have an amazing partner. He's fantastic. I have family close by, which I'm super grateful for. And I have a great kid who makes it fun. But of course it's exhausting, and there are days where everything goes wrong. But I think the other thing too is like we've created a culture here where being a parent is actually a pro, not a con. So when we're hiring, like we can never ask people legally, like, are you a parent or not? But when we find out that they are, we get even more excited because we know it's going to just help them do better work here. And it gives us more play testers. And yeah, it's just awesome. But so we've created a culture where like it's totally appropriate to have your kid sitting on the call with you if you need to, or to hop off because they just vomited at daycare and you got to go get them. Like there's just so many situations like that we're all just so used to now. And just having a team that supports me as well, like knowing that when I have to disappear, because like 2 weeks ago, my son was really sick and I had to drop everything and go get him and spend 2 days at home with him. And my husband couldn't. So it was me and I was happy to do it. But like my whole team had to step up and cover for me. And that it's so wonderful to know that they're ready to do that when I need them, and that I'll do that for them when their kid gets sick and they have to go home.
I think you're just better dealing with curveballs, right? I think just like the way that kind of curveballs come at you in life and in work, you're just much better at them because of the way you had to deal with them at home. And just like you had to drop the ball and at work and go home and deal with the other ones juggling around. It's definitely something I think parents have more experience, unfortunately, dealing with these days. But I guess, from your perspective, you speak to a lot of parents and you see a lot of children playing. How is those conversations with friends in your community, parents in the office, shaping the app's future? What do you hope that it does for those families that are interacting with Pok Pok?
That's a really great question. The conversations are crucial because, we're only 20 people on the team. Not all of us are parents. So we still have a lot to learn from the community. And we want to make sure we're building for the parent just as much as we are for the kid. And that's a really important part of our business, is that we have a user to support and a customer, and they're different. So I think a big thing that we learn from parents, and which is also for the parents, is that using the tools around you to get through the day is how you survive parenting. And in this day and age, in 2024, that means technology is one of the tools in your tool belt, just like the secret snack cupboard and just like the weekend at the grandparents. So it's really important for us to understand, like, what are the bumps in the road? What are the moments where parents need these tools to help them? And then how can we serve them best in that time? So Pok Pok, for example, was always designed to be used without the help of a grown-up, even at the age of 2. And that was specifically because we knew when parents pull out an iPad or their phone for their kid to use, it's usually because they need to be not there. They need to be, talking to the person at the hardware store or dealing with dinner or whatever. So they need somebody else to be there to support them. And so we really we really just want to make sure we're listening. And I think in the future, it's going to become even more clear, just like what those moments are, because they do change, especially when your kids age and get older. And we have users that are 2 and 3 and users that are 7 and 8. So totally different life journeys with both of those age ranges. And then also just thinking about how we feel about technology in general as parents. We're really digging into that a lot with our users, and also parents we meet who are not users yet, to understand what are they looking for, what do they hate, what do they love, how can we support them best, and what are their kids into? This one's a funny one, because when we think of the future of Pok Pok, we're thinking about the content as much as we are the tool of it all. And the content is interesting because, of course, like, our team's super creative. We have a lot of ideas as to what we could build, but we're not toddlers. Like, we're not young kids ourselves as much as we'd love to pretend we are sometimes. So we really rely on kids to tell us what we should make. And we actually just got our first audio message today from a user, and it's just their kid who can't be older than like 3. It's like 90% just like nonsense, and you can't even understand what the kid's saying. But then every few seconds you'll get like a word or two, and it's the cutest thing. And you just get like dinosaurs, and then like the bears, and you're like, okay, like, so what do they want? So really understanding, like, what do kids find fun? What are they interested in? That's super important to us as well. So we spend a lot of time talking to parents.
It sounds like the kids focus group commercials where they have a kid sitting around the table trying out like a new popsicle flavor or something.
Yes.
And you can't really understand anything, but like all of a sudden a new combination comes up and it like hits the jackpot.
Yeah. Quickly when a kid does not like what you made, because they'll just like drop that and walk away. And you're like, okay, we have to go back to it.
That's a really good way of learning what you built. Yeah.
And that's the best. Like, adults do not, like, I know this from Snowman, like play testing. Adults are like, yeah, like, this is really great. Like, here's what I like. Here's what could be improved.
Complimentary without like insulting you.
Yeah. We're all too nice, but a kid just like throws it at you and walks. You're just like, cool, we have to fix that.
You mentioned something about the future of education and technology, I guess, as children are evolving. How do you see the future of education involving technology for your own young children and people around the world?
It's interesting. I don't know exactly what we're going to see, honestly, but I think a lot of the tooling we're getting through AI is going to change the way we learn completely. Even something like math notes, which Apple announced at WWDC, where you can write like 2 + 4 equals and then just nothing, and their app will fill in 6. Like that to me is interesting. I think a lot about the impact of that, about how it could really help children deepen their understanding of math and learn complex things in a way that they're like fully supported without judgment, because it's a tool and not a parent or a teacher. But I can also see how that can be very detrimental, because you're not learning how to get to that answer. You're just being given the answer. And as somebody who always struggled with math in school, that to me would be like both the coolest thing ever and also my kryptonite that might hold me back because I'm not really learning. So I think it's going to be really important that we find ways to measure children's learning without technology, actually. And I think that it's going to be really important to do that without standardized testing, in my opinion. So I'm pretty anti-standardized testing. I think that the way kids learn best is not through trying to memorize and regurgitate stuff. And I think that typically that stuff just leaves your brain the second the test is done. And not all people who are smart are good at writing tests and performing under that pressure. But I also think that this day and age, you're in, let's say, 9th grade, you have to write a paper, you go home, you plug it into ChatGPT, you make a few changes. Where does that leave you? And where does that leave us as a society? And so I think we have to find ways to, yes, use these tools for good and to enhance and deepen the learning we're already doing, but also not to rely on them too much to the point where we're not thinking for ourselves anymore. And that's what I think it's really important at a young age, to ignite like a real sense of curiosity in kids that they want to learn. And even if they do have to write a paper about the Industrial Revolution and they're using ChatGPT to get going, that they know that they're curious enough to try to figure out like the nuances of the story and dig into it just for out of their own interest, not because their teacher told them to. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how things evolve. But I'm always joking, my son's not even going to need to learn how to drive because self-driving cars will just be everywhere. And I wonder like what the educational equivalent of that's going to be. Will he even need to learn how to spell, because everything's just so automated and nobody's writing by hand.
Right. Exactly. No one knows cursive anymore. That's why I always had a problem with like open book tests, because it was kind of like regurgitating, but there's, studies behind why it also doesn't necessarily hurt kids. What are your thoughts on like Elon Musk synthesis school? I'm sure you've taken a look at that and the way they kind of do groupthink and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Honestly, I love these like alternative forms of learning. I really like the unschooling movement too. I think the problem is just like not everybody has access to this. So like, how do we democratize this kind of learning? How do we open up like the Montessori's and the Waldorfs of the world to people who can actually afford them? And I think technology can be a really great tool there, because you can do it en masse and it can become a really fantastic way to scale that kind of learning beyond, social economic boundaries, challenges. But I think he's doing this cool. Like, I'm not necessarily a huge fan of him as a person. I think that concept is fantastic, and it pushes kids to think in ways that I haven't always seen in traditional education.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to ask you a last question before we jump into the fast favorites. What legacy do you hope Pok Pok will leave in the realm of children's education going forward?
I hope it will leave people with joy and a feeling of beautiful nostalgia for their childhoods. I think back on all of my favorite toys and books as a kid, and some of them just bring back this like full body warmth, and I would love for Pok Pok to have the same effect on these kids in 15 or 20 years from now. And I think as a parent too, just knowing that you're giving your kid something that you feel safe about now, it's the best that you can do, because the world is a really scary place. So I hope our legacy remains a really positive, safe, just high quality one that hopefully can stand the test of time, despite how quickly technology is moving.
I guess I should have asked you this. Why did you call it Pok Pok? Is it some German translation or something?
No, that is a testament to my brilliant co-founders. Yeah, when we were trying to think of names for the company, they're like, we've got it. And I honestly wasn't even convinced, but they loved it so much. I was sold. And then I'm so glad they talked me into it. Pok Pok means nothing. Like, it's when their first son, James, was born. You know, when your kid's born, you're just trying to do anything to make them laugh for the first time. And it's just like, it's what you need to survive the sleepless nights. And so they're just trying to make him laugh for days and nothing was working. And then finally, they just like took his hand and poked his like giant chubby baby cheek and said like Pok Pok. And then it just became this kind of family inside joke whenever they wanted to make each other laugh. And we have a little video of it on our YouTube. It's like ancient, and then he threw up right after. And it's like this very funny.
Very apropos. Ours is, I call my daughter Gabagoo, and it's just one of those like funny nicknames that she uses. And now she says it out loud, and it's with a lisp. It's hilarious. All right, let's jump into our fast favorites. First is your favorite podcast.
Ooh, and we can do hard things with
Nice.
Glennon Doyle, Abby Wambach, and Amanda.
Great one. Next is your favorite newsletter or blog.
Ooh, Why We Buy by Caitlin Burgoyne.
What's that
so
about?
So good, so smart. Buyer psychology every week in like the most interesting. It's like one of 2 newsletters I read, and she is a beautiful person. I love her. Everyone should read this.
Favorite tech gadget.
Oh, it's got to be my phone. It's got to be my iPhone. So boring, but
What
so
apps do you have now that you didn't have before, starting Pok Pok? Besides Pok Pok, obviously.
I have every other competitor app.
Do you? Oh, of course, yeah.
I have a whole folder just called Kids Apps.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
That's hilarious. You use it as like your children test it out or something,
Yeah, I'm just constantly spying on everyone.
Nice.
I wish I could be more classy about it, but I
I get
to see
it.
what everyone's up to.
Favorite new trend?
I think, the democratization of AI is so interesting. I mean, for better, for worse, there's just a lot going on, and I love staying up to date on what's new there.
Nice. Favorite book?
The Measure. Have you read it?
No, what's that about?
It's about people who find out how long they're going to live. Like everyone on Earth gets a box with a string, and they realize it's like the length of their life. Some people open the box, some people don't open the box. And it just teaches you about like, if you knew you were a short stringer, let's say, and you only had a couple of years left, how would you live differently? Or if you knew you'd last till 90.
Well, there's a funny Seinfeld clip where he says, what's so great about this? So you're on your deathbed and you're saying 4, 3, 2, 1. And what's so great about that? And last but not least, your favorite life lesson.
If you have doubt, you have no doubt. That's one I think about a lot.
Oh, wow. Where'd you hear that?
An old boss said it to me. Yeah. And I didn't get much from that person, honestly, but that always stuck with me.
Well, thanks for joining us in the tank today with Melissa Cash, co-founder and CEO of Pok Pok.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Tank Talks. We hope you found today's conversation as insightful as we did. If you're enjoying the show, we've got 3 quick things to ask of you. First, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or YouTube. Next, follow us and stay up to date on upcoming episodes and behind-the-scenes content on social media with Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. And lastly, share the love. If you found value in today's episode, share with a friend or colleague who'd benefit too. Your support helps us bring in more amazing guests and keeps the Tank Talks engine running. That's it for today. Until next time, keep disrupting and innovating.